MotoGP has seen some truly dominant seasons over the years, but which ones stand above the rest? Well, I've dug through over 50 years of results, and I'm going to break down the top 5 most dominant seasons in Grand Prix racing history. And by the end of the video, you'll not only know which seasons were the most dominant, but what it must have felt like for every other rider. Now, for a baseline, let me give you the average championship gap between first and second. There's been a lot of dominant rides over the years, but only a few of these seasons really stand out. If we take out the top 5 most dominant seasons, the average gap between first and second in the championship after it's all finished is around 29 points. Not a huge gap, but not a small one either. So what that means is anything over 50 points is considered pretty good. In 5th place, we jump straight into one of the seasons from the modern MotoGP era, which actually has a couple of reasons why it was so dominant. Let me explain. Jorge Lorenzo, Valentino Rossi, and Dani Pedrosa were the main title contenders in 2010, with Rossi coming off the back of his 6th MotoGP title the year before. Rossi and Lorenzo were the early favourites, with neither of them finishing off of the podium in the first 3 rounds. Lorenzo came out on top in Le Mans, but unfortunately, this was going to be Rossi's last race to fight for the championship. A huge high side in a practice session at Mugello gave him 2 compound fractures, which means he wasn't able to race for several rounds. Obviously, this left the title up to Lorenzo and Pedrosa. Dani won at Mugello, Sachsenring, Indianapolis, and San Marino, but Dani didn't have a speed problem. He just had a lot of bad luck and didn't seem to bounce very well in a crash. At Motegi, Dani fractured his collarbone during a pretty nasty crash, which, like Rossi, meant he had to miss quite a few rounds. Lorenzo took the championship at Malaysia and managed a huge 9 wins and 16 podiums out of 18 races. Dani Pedrosa, despite missing lots of rounds, finished second in the championship. Lorenzo had 383 points. Dani had 245, 138 points behind. And at the time, it was also the new all-time point scoring record for one season. Hey everyone, quick reminder, we also have a KneeDown MotoGP podcast, which you can check in the link in the description below. Moving on to number 4, we have to go back a few years to the very first season in MotoGP. 2002 saw the retirement of the 500cc 2-stroke engines in favour of the more powerful 990cc 4-stroke engines. Tensions were quite high between the 2 main rivals of the season, Valentino Rossi and Max Biaggi, with both of them having multiple fights, not just on, but off the track as well. Unfortunately for Biaggi though, the season was over before it even began. Take a look at the first 10 rounds between Rossi and Biaggi. Biaggi was nowhere near as consistent. Rossi finished on the podium every single time he saw the checkered flag. And it was the same story with the rest of the season. Rossi had 1 DNF, but managed 11 wins and wrapped the championship up with 4 rounds to go. He ended the season with 355 points, with Biaggi managing 215, a 140-point difference. For number 3, we need to go even further back to the glory days of the 500cc GP era. This was also a joint 3rd place, by the way. So talk about consistency. But there's also another reason why these seasons were so dominant and so special, which I'll explain in a minute. In 1994, Australian Mick Doohan had settled back into the GP World Championship after one of the most horrific crashes in GP racing, which nearly ended his racing career altogether. He struggled in 1993 and never really seemed to get back into the swing of things. And a lot of people thought he wouldn't be able to challenge for a win, let alone a championship. Oh boy, were we wrong. Luca Cadalora was the other championship contender in 1994, and he did pretty well in the opening rounds, with 1 podium and 2 4th places. However, that was overshadowed by Doohan completely, who finished on the podium every single round. He won 9 races out of the 14 in total, which was the most since Agostini's 11 wins in one season over 20 years ago. Doohan took his first 500cc GP championship with 317 points. Cadalora was second with only 174 points, 143 points between them. But Doohan didn't overcome this horrific injury and dominate the field once. He did it twice. In 1997, Doohan and Tadayuki Okada were battling for the championship, but the story was much of the same this year as well. He managed almost another Grand Slam but retired in the final round at Australia. But up until then, he finished on the podium every single race, and he won a total of 12 times, beating Agostini's record from 1972. Doohan finished the season with 340 points, and Okada finished with 197. Again, 143 points between them. Moving forward in time to the MotoGP era again, with the second most dominant season in Grand Prix racing history. Valentino Rossi, Marco Melandri, and Nicky Hayden ended up fighting for the top spot in 2005. Rossi entered 2005 as the reigning world champion, winning the past 4 titles on the bounce. It wasn't all plain sailing, and Rossi found himself immediately in hot water during the first round. Rossi and Gibernau clashed in the final corner, and Rossi forced himself through to take the win. His domination continued pretty early on in the season. He took 5 wins on the bounce from Shanghai to Assen, and Melandri, Gibernau, and Nicky Hayden battled for who was going to be best to the rest. But a trip back to the USA for the first time since 1994 put an end to that dominant streak. He could only muster 3rd place, and Nicky Hayden took his very first Premier Class win in front of his home crowd. This wasn't actually the turning point that everyone had hoped for. Rossi got straight back into his rhythm with another set of wins. And there was only one small hiccup that he made with a retirement at Motegi after a crash with Marco Melandri. Believe it or not, this was his only non-podium finish of the season. Despite the crash, Rossi wrapped up the championship at Malaysia with 4 rounds to go. He ended the season with 11 wins and 16 podiums out of 17 races, finishing with 367 points. Marco Melandri finished second, a massive 147 points behind. So here we are, the most dominant season in MotoGP history. Let's dive in. 2019 had one of the most stacked grids of all time. Marquez coming from his 3rd championship on the bounce and 6th Premier Class title, Andrea Dovizioso, Valentino Rossi, and hotshot Fabio Quartararo. The grid was nuts. The season opened with a brilliant race at Qatar, with Dovi narrowly taking the win over Marquez on the very last lap. Mark responded by obliterating the field at Argentina, but was caught out by a very rare mistake at Kota. But this was pretty much the only moment of weakness. After that, he was untouchable, and no one had the same consistency as him. Marquez sealed the title in Thailand with a last lap, last corner pass on Fabio Quartararo, making it official with 4 races to spare. He finished the year with 12 wins and 18 podiums out of 19 races, and a record-breaking 420 points, the highest ever in MotoGP history at the time. Andrea Dovizioso finished second, 151 points behind him. Speaking of top 5s, if you want to learn more about the top 5 best rookie seasons in MotoGP history, click on this video here. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.